Hello, welcome to Hellotouf, the new media, tech and film review channel, formerly Mad About Film, which was just a film review channel. But anyway, today I'm going to review The Souvenir, the new film by Joanna Hogg. Let's have a look at the trailer.
Very special, Julie.
I don't think I am.
Oh no, you don't think you are.
Very normal, really.
You're not normal at all.
I feel as though I want to not live my whole life in this very privileged part of the world I come from. I want to be really aware about what's going on around me. Sorry.
We can all be sincere, but what's it all for?
So I'm trying to work out where you two tessellate here. How, what, why, when.
Can you lend me a couple of quid?
Yeah, sure. Not me. Can I borrow some money? Please.
More money?
Yes.
Oh.
You're too nice. You need to properly get aggressive.
Don't lie, Anthony.
If you don't want to know,
I do
then
want to
don't
know.
ask. Stop torturing yourself.
I'm not.
Stop inviting me to torture you.
Opening with a messy idea of television feedback, you immediately know that you're going into nostalgia land and also back to the time of the 80s. And then you hear the voice of Julie, our protagonist and main character of The Souvenir. What's immediate in terms of the presence and the aesthetic of the film is the idea of memory that's being evoked by the 8mm and the 60mm film formats that Julie's actually using in the film. So she's obviously a film student, and the presence of the opening scene is that basically you're taken to this context of a historical document almost by Joanna Hogg, and the fact is that Julie is a reflection of Joanna Hogg, so therefore her capturing memories and ideas on 8mm and 60mm film are very evocative in terms of the opening scenes, and knowing that you're being dragged into this time, this period of the late 70s, early 80s in terms of where the story's been told. Some people who've watched this film have said that they haven't really been able to connect with the characters of Anthony and Julie in the film because they come from this very privileged middle to upper class background. And actually, I mean, I guess really that's where you have to kind of detach yourself from it, because it's a personal story for the director Joanna Hogg. So if she came from that background, she came from that background. But really it's about, in terms of understanding Julie and Anthony, the main two leads in the film as characters, the point is that actually what you want to see is the kind of background and class system that they came from, and that's where you kind of have to let go of like trying to empathise with the characters, and just try and accept about who they are. And it's important to realise that this film really isn't for your kind of like Green Street stroke Fast and Furious kind of audiences. This is a very thoughtful think piece really about character. It does come across as a bit like a theatre piece or a play, and that's what's interesting, because when you kind of put the context of the human performances within the characters, you realise that what you're looking at in terms of the storytelling is the human aspects of the actual characters, and really the background and the class system doesn't really matter. There's an aloofness to Tom Burke's Anthony in this film, and Anthony himself is a middle to upper class person who works for the Foreign Office, and it's interesting to watch this character because he has certain flaws which obviously are the things and the factors that actually kind of lead to the detrimental aspect of the relationship. So the main crux is where you see this very, very posh, not very likeable person who's very smug and arrogant kind of fall in love with Julie, and at the same time you have to accept that, absolutely, because that's why you're there to watch the film, to accept the fact that there is a love story element to this whole film. But accepting Anthony in himself, whether you like him or not, that doesn't matter. It's the fact that Julie does accept Anthony, and the point is the struggle is that what Julie has in terms of the relationship she has with Anthony, that's the most important thing in the film. I know that sounds really convoluted, but essentially you've got two people, they're together, and the point is you have to accept their flaws to understand the characters themselves, what they're portraying, and you have to understand where they come from and what their background is to really try and get on the same level of what Julie has to put up with. You've got to remember that in this characterisation, Anthony's much older than Julie, and Julie's quite young and obviously still at film school. What happens throughout the process of the film is that the relationship that is deemed love is actually a toxic and burdensome one for Julie, and that's the tragedy of the whole piece. It's quite hard to like Tom Burke's character Anthony in this film, and Julie herself is very, very sweet, and to see the dichotomy of the two people that come from different backgrounds, or slightly different backgrounds, but obviously attracted to each other in some form. I think, you know, Julie's attracted to Tom Burke's Anthony's confidence. Tom Burke himself is actually, you know, a very handsome chap, and I think he carries the character really, really well. It'll be interesting to see how Tom Burke, the actual actor, is, because the way he must have adapted to try and be that kind of character. I doubt he's like this character in real life, but obviously he would have drawn on some influences or some kind of class system to be able to give that kind of performance as Anthony. But anyway, it's the dynamic between Anthony and Julie that's the key and the crux to this film. I like this film very much, and the thing is, there's all these little references to, it's a filmmaker's film. You've got someone at film school, it's a love story, it's also, the story itself is about the trials and tribulations of a relationship and how it comes together and how it goes on, and it's also done in a very, very subtle way. It's filmed in a very good mixture of documentary style, 8mm, 16mm film, 35mm film as well, I think, and at the same time also on HD. So you can see the techniques of film that have kind of come together, and there's so many montages and little touches of sort of past documentary aspects from Joanna Hogg's career that must have come from her film school. Snippets of film which kind of like spliced into the edit, which are really clever, because it kind of was at once, while you're focusing on the main relationship of Julie and Anthony, then you kind of get taken out and get put into the context of the environment, and the environment very much informs the story as a whole. There was one other reference which made me love the film as well. It's a reference to Frank Capra's It Happened One Night with Claudette Colbert and Clark Gable, and it's a very slight reference, but it just goes to show the depth and the interesting nature of film, and how film kind of invokes into this idea of relationship and memory. And I think that's the clever bit of the whole of the Souvenir, is that when it comes to relationships are very much formed with memory, and it's very sad to see in relationships when they fall apart how people deal with that, and how they deal with it on their own, in their own terms, on their own throughout their own consequences. And it's very tricky to understand what people have to go through individually, and this kind of film kind of bears, warts and all, what happens when two people are coming at a relationship from two different angles, and that's the tragedy of the film, really. Tilda Swinton, who's a good friend of Joanna Hogg's, makes an appearance in the film and is Honor Swinton Byrne's mother. Obviously, the name's in the title, people could say nepotism, maybe. I'm not sure, but it doesn't really matter. The point is, Tilda Swinton's in the film, and the fact is that actually she's really good in it. Tilda Swinton herself doesn't steal the limelight. She plays very much a supporting role, and at the same time never really detracts from the main character of Julie. Julie, and Honor Swinton Byrne, is the real star of this film, and her naturalness, her way of being, her air of nonchalantness, I guess is the word. That's not really a word, is it? But her air is light, and she has a real grace, and she's great on camera, absolutely fantastic. And the thing that kind of stands out the most is that knowing that she's there as the main lead, Tilda Swinton never detracts from that, and that's really important. Richard Ayoade also is in this film, and he plays a pretentious socialite at the same time, also a film student and a filmmaker as such, which is kind of a reflection of his real life as such. And what I love about his little scene and cameo is that he talks about film being a con, and that is just a little bit of genius. The main crux of the relationship that kind of recurs in the film is also the fact that Julie has to realise herself that, within the relationship that she has with Anthony, is trying to understand where she is really in the relationship, and also whether or not it's really helping her for her future career. Obviously, she's very passionate about film. There's a lot of supporting cast characters who basically talk about sort of where is she in film school, why is she always not there, and she's doing so much for this person she loves, and that's the problem, is that as a young person you're going to fall in love, and you're going to want to do stuff for the partner that you so helplessly love. But the point is, if that person is flawed and if they have problems, do they support them, or do they run away, or do they stand up to them? And that's a big question when it comes to relationships, especially young relationships. The tragedy in the idea of love in this film is that when you want to do stuff for other people, when you want to love someone else and you want them to love you back, what you end up, or can end up doing, is losing yourself to someone else and not doing enough for yourself. And I think that's the real story behind The Souvenir. Whoever you are, whatever your demons are, you have to remember to make sure that you look after yourself. And the point is that while you look after yourself, you can always help other people and be supportive. But in this particular film, it shows that if you don't look after yourself, you're not going to get anywhere. And that's the real tragedy of The Souvenir. It is a film worth watching. And also, there's one thing about this film that it needs to highlight, is that people have problems. People can't cope with their own problems. And in this case, there seems to be more of an emphasis on the man having more of the problem. And you remember that if people who are watching this review, there is serious things like to do with drug addiction, and also that is a highlight of this film. And you have to remember that people who are drug addicted, they can't seem to help themselves, and that's really important. The message I would say is, if you do watch this film, is just to remember to people who are going through this stuff, not judge them too much, and know that they need help, they need structure, they need to get themselves back on their feet, and sometimes they just can't because they're addicted. In terms of problems like addiction. I think, considering this review, I'll put a link in the description to call a helpline for people who are addicted, because you have to remember it's not just you going through it, it's the people around you that have to be affected by it. So there's plenty of charities out there and plenty of lines and plenty of help that one can get to try and help people who are in moments of crisis. So yeah, link will be in the description anyway. The Souvenir is ultimately a sad and destructive tale, and a very personal one for the director Joanna Hogg. The personal story elements of the film also highlight what it's like to live in the real world as well as live in the imagined one. The cinematography in the film is really composed, really well framed, it's really well structured, and the touches of reality aligned with memory and the ideas of memory and real life, and the balance between real life and memory, and what is film, how does film inform that, how does film help us realise what memory really is. It's really well done by Joanna Hogg. It's just a very interesting film, The Souvenir, because of that. And if you're a film fan, you're going to probably love this film because of the techniques that are employed, especially if you've been to film school. You might like that idea of it. But really, the thing that kind of pulls you through the story is just to remember that these are real life stories, and because it's a personal story for Joanna Hogg, you do realise that even though there's film and there's memory and there's these ideas of relationships and there's these stories to be told, you have to remember there's a reality that we all have to face up to. Films that The Souvenir kind of reminded me of, not directly but indirectly, were Land of Freedom by Ken Loach and also Truly Madly Deeply by Anthony Minghella. The touches and the techniques of the 80s evoked in this film just took me back to when I was a younger film student. It's available to rent and on digital and download in probably a couple of months or so, but it's also on Curzon Home Cinema, which is where I watched it, and also you can sort of rent that for 48 hours for $9.99. So I would recommend seeing The Souvenir. It will be in the cinemas for a little bit longer, but at the same time you can get it on Curzon Home Cinema and should be there for a while. Yeah, definitely worth checking out. Watch it. It's worth it if you're into film, if you're into relationship films, if you're into love stories, and also if you're into realistic Ken Loach type dramas. The Souvenir is the film for you. I loved it because of all the touches towards film, but what can you do? Thanks for watching my review of The Souvenir, starring Honor Swinton, Byrne and Tom Burke. Basically, yeah, that's quite a long review. I think I did a big one there, but essentially I'm going to do another review very, very soon. I'm probably going to do The Farewell, which I watched the other day, yeah, if you want to watch another film review on my channel, just basically click here. There'll be more film reviews and tech reviews and media forum talks to come in the future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.